The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.
You know, I had a chance to briefly meet Chris Bledsoe a couple of years ago, and I look forward to getting a chance to talk to him about his experiences at length. I guess experiencer is the most appropriate term to use for what he and his family have been through, but it kind of falls short of being an accurate description. I mean, he's having encounters with orbs, UFOs, entities, shadow people, and something far more advanced and angelic. Call her the lady. It's a lot different from your typical UFO encounter story, though there are similarities, including episodes of missing time, some very scary moments, and the personal costs and stigma that walk hand in hand with these kinds of profound events. Chris Bledsoe finally tells the broad scope about his journey in a new book called UFO of God. Chris Bledsoe, great to have you here on Coast to Coast.
George, I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for staying up late. I'm so glad the book is now out and you can tell the whole world what's been going on for you and your family. You mentioned in your book that for a long time you were under some restrictions about what you could or couldn't say about your experiences. Can you tell us what those restrictions are? Is it NDAs that you've signed?
Well, sort of. Really, I didn't sign anything, but it was an agreement with some folks in the government that really the only folks that made any sense to this family, if they wanted to study the phenomenon, they started right away. Some guys from NASA was the first ones to come, and it was like this, we'll let you in on some stuff if you'll just, keep quiet about it, and we want to study it, and we want you to stay as clean as you can. In other words, don't go to these UFO shows, don't talk to anybody else. We want your experience to be yours, and so that's kind of how it all started. And I've been around a lot of government people that have been very kind to us.
Well, I think that's probably what caught my attention about your story. I only heard bits and pieces of the experiences you and your family have had, but what really got my attention were some of the government people that I know who are really interested in what's been happening to you and who have vouched for your veracity. I mean, Colonel Alexander is someone I've known for a long time, and then Jim Semivan, both of them had worked in intelligence capacities. Both are pretty trustworthy folks, and both of them say you're the real deal. And then I open your book, and there's the forwards by Jim Semivan and the introductions by John Alexander. So that's a great way to get into your story, I think.
Yeah, those are mighty nice friends of ours, and if you read the book, and of course you have, but to the audience, you'll see how the way this thing happened, it just really, with 4 small children, my daughter was about 10 years old, my oldest was 17, and we had no idea about UFOs. We wasn't into that. It was, just being a mom and dad and building houses, and suddenly our life was turned upside down, and the whole community, the church, everybody I knew thought I was crazy, or the devil was, visiting my property. And so we became kind of isolated, and we ended up, the only sense being made was people like John and Jim that came to help put things back together, and they really did. I mean, it made a big difference in family dynamics.
Well, there's a lot of biographical detail that I want to cover at some point tonight. Peaks and valleys. Man, you have been through the ringer in your life, ups and downs, and more of a roller coaster ride than most of us ever experience. We'll get to that a little bit, but I want to start with the story you've told now a bunch of times to different people. It's the primary events that changed your life that all came flooding in at one time. Can you tell us the basic story of that night out in the woods with the subcontractors and your son?
Yes, sir. It was January the 8th of 2007, And to back up just a little bit, I was a general contractor builder and had been for almost 20 years. And not Desert Storm, but the 9/11 World Trade Center thing happened, and that really affected my business. And I just watched a slow motion train wreck happen. And, by 2007, the economy collapsed. So what happened I had a condition called Crohn's disease that didn't like stress at all. And the worse the company was going through its cash, the worse my disease got, and ended up losing everything except for my family. And I mean, we were in a 5,000-foot home with a pool, and just everybody was happy. Next thing I know, we're in a mobile home trying to find how to get free lunches for my children at school. That's where I was mentally. Let's just say I'd gone through a near-death experience in 2004, and it was some really rough times. And so basically, I was at a point in my life that I was calling on, the only thing I knew was whoever's up in the sky, whoever's there. I was desperate. Help me. What am I going to do? I was thinking the unthinkable. And so my dad had a construction company, and he said, "Why don't you go look after a house for me? You need to get out of the house." I was sick, living next door to him now, and so I took on the job for 4 months, and the guys that were with us that night were the contractors on the job, and they had been gone 4 months, came home, and wanted to celebrate. So Chris Jr. and I were at home. His mother and our other children were away with her mom. And so we said, "Sure, I'll take you fishing." So I had the only four-wheel drive truck, and we needed it to get down into this spot. So about 2:30 in the day, they called, and they came by and got their money, and went. They came from an hour and a half out of town, and on the way home, they called and said, "Let's go." So we picked them up, took them to the river, and got there about 2:30, 2:45. Pulled up on down through. We crossed a cornfield, about 200 yards across, to the backside of the field, to a wood line, and then you go down through the woods with the truck, and you actually lose about 100 foot of elevation down to where the river is. And so they were sitting there on the bank fishing, got all set up, and I wasn't into fishing. I was struggling, not letting them know, especially my son, what I was thinking. And so I walked away about a good 20 minutes after we got started. They did. And I walked back into the back of the cul-de-sac, down into the woods about a quarter mile, and sat beside an oak tree and just meditating and reaching out to whoever was up there. Just, "Please help me." That's where I was. And I came out of the woods about, 4:45, maybe 10 minutes to 5, and it was getting dark in there. I didn't have a flashlight, and it gets dark. Well, the sun sets about 5:30 in January, so in the forest it's darker earlier. And so I came out of there. I walked up to where they were setting fishing. They were all side by side, sitting there with their poles on a little stick they had made, this forked stick. And I said, "You guys want to go home, or you want to fish more?" And I said, "Well, let's fish. We're just getting started." I said, "Well, it's going to get cold. We better get a fire going." So we went around this little acre grassy area, just 1 acre, picking up firewood, and had a really big stack sitting there, and got a fire going, and right at their back. So they were sitting on the riverbank, right on the edge of the water, and the fire was behind them. And so I said, "I'm going to walk up to the field and sit till it's completely dark and see if any wildlife comes out." I really wasn't interested in that, but that's what I told him. So I left them walking 10 after 5, had a 20-minute walk it wouldn't take 10 minutes and if you didn't stop to get that quarter of a mile. That's all it was from the bottom up to that field. So as I got near the top of the hill, and it was the last 100 yards was a pretty good climb up the hill. And it was almost dark. I couldn't see where my feet were stepping through mud, muddy road. And so I'd take a step or two and I'd look up and I'd go up the hill another couple, 3 steps. Well, finally, I saw what I thought was a setting sun just right above the tree. Just on top of the tree. And it looked strange, but I looked down and took a couple more steps and I looked up and I could see more of it. And I thought, boy, that looks weird. And so I looked down and took a couple, 3 more steps up. And when I did, my peripheral vision became wider because the trees were growing right up beside the road. So I had to shoot like I was looking through. But as I got near the top, I noticed there were 2 setting suns there. And that's when fear set in. It just immediately I dropped to my knees using the hill in front of me to hide myself from these 2 50-foot balls. They're about 50 foot around, fire, orange-red fire. It looked like the sun when you can look at it late in the evening and it don't hurt your eyes. And so I was going through everything I could think of, what it was. Being a commercial-rated pilot, I knew right away it wasn't nothing I was familiar with. And so I actually got curious. On my knees, I kind of crawled over into the ditch, this little shallow ditch, and got in some thick brush, and I eased my way up to the hill where I could part the weeds and look through and see these 2 objects about 300 yards away and not very high over the trees at all. And I decided I had to run. I was afraid. I had all I could stand. And I was thinking about my son and these guys down there, and I thought, well, I'm going to run. And I turned my body downhill in that direction, and I made a plan. I'm going to go downhill. I'm going to look up before I take off. I got to see it one more time. And when I did that, I stood up, I turned my body in motion. I'm running now. I'm just in the motion to do it. And it was important because when I looked back, this 3rd one above me appeared like within 1 second and shot down beside the other 2. Well, I knew immediately that they saw me. I knew they knew I was there. It responded to my, what I was doing, what I was thinking. I knew it did. I knew my thoughts. And so I took off. All I could remember, George, is the last 50 feet running up to the fire. I was kind of trotting, and the fire was burnt down. There wasn't a big pile of wood there anymore, and there was just 3 guys standing there. And I trotted up to them, and I'm like, coming out of the darkness. I'm coming right up to them out of the dark, and they're like, where in the world have you been? I said, what do you mean? I was just up at the field. They said, no, you've been gone all night. We've been looking for you all night long. And so that freaked me out, and I noticed Chris Jr. wasn't there. So I'm like, where's Christopher? They said, well, he went in the woods where you went earlier, in the back of the cul-de-sac 2 hours ago, and we haven't seen him since. We can't find him, and we couldn't find you. And so I just immediately took off towards the back of that grassy area looking for Christopher. All I could think is he's in these big woods, he's going to be lost, and we got a problem. And so I made my way back to the back of that little spot and started parting my way into the forest, shouting for him. And he wouldn't answer me the whole time until I got right up on him, almost stepping on him, to where he come out from under the bushes. He was laying on his stomach, and he's crying, and he's, why'd you leave me, Dad? Why'd you leave me? I said, I didn't leave you, son. I've been gone 20 minutes. He said, no, Daddy, you've been gone all night. So I was really confused, bad. I led him back to the fire, and he was telling me about these two balls of light, two red balls that he saw while he was searching for me. They came down the path all the way up to him, and he started hiding the closer they got. It scared him. And when they got within 15 feet of him, he noticed there were two little beings about 3.5 feet tall, and they were translucent with these red glowing eyes. And he described that he couldn't move, he couldn't shout, he just felt paralyzed. While one was watching him all the time, and the other one was picking up sticks and bottles and looking at them and that kind of thing. So I led him back to the fire, and these three guys, they were totally silent, eyes as big as an owl. They were freaked out by now because they heard me, talking about something I'd seen in the air. And Christopher, he was in shock. He was talking about this creature, two of them. And so within 2 minutes of us getting to the fire, one of the guys shouted, "Look," and he was pointing straight up. And we all raised our heads up to the sky. It was clear. It was cold. And it was like they choreographed it. There were stars that looked like Venus, that bright. Probably 8 to 9 of them. And they just came together from different points and made a circle. And then they went away from each other. And then they came back. And then 3 of them came all the way down and landed across the river from us on the other side of the river, which was only probably 75 yards away. So pandemonium set in. And we all jumped in the truck, left our fishing poles there, everything, and started up out of there as fast as we could go. And that road was muddy. The mirrors were, scrubbing on bushes on either side, and the truck was wallowing in these deep ruts, and they were screaming to the top of their lungs. I just knew we were being invaded by something. And as we got back up to the field, well, there's the same 3 that was there when I left, which I didn't see them when I left. I only remembered the last 50 feet, but they were still there, except one of the orange balls of fire is now on the ground, about 5 foot off the ground, hovering 150 yards away, blocking our path to the highway. And it looks like a football, bright white, with the light just swirling around it. It was the most incredible looking thing. And then it turns and it comes straight at us and went right over the top of my truck. I could have shot it with a slingshot when it went over the top. And that's when we flew out of there. That was one heck of a scary thing.
In the book, you tell it's funny now, but it wasn't funny at the time. But the chatter in the truck is, let's get the heck out of here. And do we know any doomsday preppers? We can go stay with them. It's an invasion kind of a thing. That's the discussion that's going on with you and your friends and your son. So, Chris, this story you're sharing with us, it's not just you and your son. You have other guys who are there. They see this thing, that these lights follow you, and you're all pretty scared by the whole thing, right?
Yeah, we were terrified. Well, let's say this, and I've told this before. When they brought me back, I had lost all fear, and I really didn't understand why they were so afraid. And it was just something, whatever they did to me. I was gone almost 4 hours, and I was happy when I ran up to the fire to tell them what I saw. But it was the strangest thing, because they were terrified completely, so bad they were shouting and screaming, wanting to go home. They were about to fight over who. There were 3 other men along with my son, and but I had to say that to make note of it, that I lost fear at that. When they brought me back, I wasn't afraid, but they were terribly afraid, and it went on all the way to taking them home. They actually fought over who was going to get home first, to see their family the last time. And I actually had to drive 4 miles out of the way to take the biggest guy home first. And we experienced them all along the way. There was a Dead Man's Curve, and I write about this in the book without giving it away, but I had a very bad loss in that curve. And for some reason, George, when we were heading in a hurry to take everybody home, there was a big object hovering right over top of where this accident happened. And that was the first time that I gained peace from that for nearly 25 or 30 years.
Well, I'll just say it now. It's the spot where your first wife was killed in an auto accident, right? It's a terrible spot for you and terrible memory.
Yeah, it was. I was 19 years old when it happened, or 20. And to see, somebody to get mangled up that bad, I found her myself by accident. But anyhow, after that night, that was the first time I felt at peace about it for some odd reason. But
on this night, though, you drop these other guys off, and you and your son go home, and that's not the end of it that night, right?
No, this is where it got crazy. We were, Christopher went through the house, turning every light on inside, including in each bedroom. He ran through, he'd lock the windows, pull the blinds down, turn the lights on, and then lock the door. Even in the bathrooms where there were no windows, he'd turn the light on, lock the door, and all the outside lights were on. And I'm in my little study trying to find it on the news. I just knew it was all over the news. It had to have been this invasion because there was so many. And by the time he gets done, he comes running back in there, and he's still looking and shocked at me. He was terrified. And about that time, my dad lived next door. We lived next door to him, actually, where I was raised. And he had hunting dogs, always had a big kennel full of dogs, anywhere from 30 to 100, because he traded them. But usually about 30 was his normal amount. But suddenly we hear this kind of weird sound come over. I immediately thought it was a helicopter from Fort Bragg because it was heading toward the river. It was only a couple miles away. And but it sounded like it just a washing machine maybe that was spinning when it starts winding down. That's kind of what it sounded like. But immediately, every dog in that kennel back behind our house shared a 6-acre piece of land, and it was a little woods back in there, just where the kennel was. And all these dogs, hound dogs, and they got a big mouth. You can hear them a mile away, and they were all barking at this really strange, scary tone, like they didn't know what was back there and they were afraid of it. So I said, Christopher, first thing I thought, I had no clue this thing followed us home. I just thought because Dad's garage, which is, as he called the boathouse, is where he kept all his fishing gear and his tools, and I had my stuff in there. I was thinking somebody was breaking in the shop, and the dogs could see them because the garage is real close to the dog pen. And it took me 5 minutes to convince Junior that I had to go out to see what was out there. I said, look, we don't need a flashlight. We got a Chesapeake Bay Retriever, Rosie. She was outside on the back steps, and her hair was standing up, and she was barking. I said, she'll keep us protected, and we'll just ease back there without a flashlight and see what's happening. And maybe she'll run them off. And so, against his protest, I opened the back door, and Rosie took off, ran out about 40 yards and stopped and looked back, saw that we were coming, and Christopher had me by the back of the shirt. So we kind of crept through the yard over to the wood where this path went through the forest and eased our way down that path and getting closer to these dogs all the minute, and they're getting louder, more exciting, and I mean, it was just, the energy was real high. I was expecting them to see somebody in the shop. Well, when we got there, all the dogs were looking backwards behind the pen down in the woods, and I thought, That's crazy because if somebody was breaking in the shop, and they ran, they would go toward the highway. They surely wouldn't go in the woods behind the dog kennel. There's no way to get in there from back there. And so Rosie was pointing into the forest, hair standing up, 15 or more hounds were right in the kennels next to her. She was right up against the end of the kennel. They're all barking every breath behind it. And I said, Junior, I said, I'm going to send Rosie in on whoever's in there. We're going to run back out to the back, to the grassy area, and there's a big oak tree at the back of the property. Let's run back there and we'll stand and see who she pushes out or what. Maybe it's a bear, because, dogs act afraid when they see a bear or smell one. They'll sound like that. And so the minute I sent her in the forest, she took off wide open, and I took off running, and Junior had me by the shirt. We had to run about 75 yards to the grass, and I had to make a left turn, and I was already crossed on the ground, so I was slipping and sliding when I turned, and he pulled loose from me. So I thought he was still behind me. I just pulled away from him. I ran hard as I could to this big tree, and I stopped myself against the tree, and I was panting. So I looked back to see, and now the dog's coming straight at me. Won't very far in there. And when I looked back behind me to see if Christopher was catching up, that's when my whole world changed. There was this little being, just like he described, is about 3.5 foot tall, and it looked like glass. His body was glowing, a soft glow like the moon, and it looked like it was shiny. The outer covering was extremely shiny. It had this triangle up under in its chest. That's what it looked like, a dark triangle. And it had red glowing eyes. And I had my hands against the tree and my back to it, right? And I just knew I was dead. That's the first thing I thought, this thing's going to kill me. So I dropped my arms to my side, and I used the tree to turn around. Now I'm not getting closer to it. I'm trying to get as tight against that tree as I could. And I had my back against the tree, and I looked, and I said, I'm sorry. I surrender. And it said, the dog's coming really close. I mean, it's getting closer by the second. It said, you don't understand. I'm not here to hurt you. We're here to help you. And about that time, Rosie comes out of the forest, and this thing just disappears right in front of me. She ran on out of hearing for a good quarter mile and didn't come back for 2 days. I didn't see her. But when I got back in the house, I noticed Christopher couldn't take it anymore. He turned and ran towards the house when I was turned left towards the back of the property. So I walked back up to the house, and him staring through the window. I didn't want to tell him what had just happened because he was so messed up already from what he had experienced. And so I was a smoker at that time. And he wouldn't let me back outside. There wasn't no going outside. So I walked in my study, and I put my knees on the couch and reached over the back to pull the window up. And he's not, what are you doing, Dad? Don't do that. Don't open that window. And I said, I got to smoke, son. I was hyperventilating from what had just happened. I'm not telling him. Right? When I pulled the curtain up or the mini blind, I saw this, because the floodlights were on all four corners of the house. There was this tall figure. I couldn't make out its details, but it was tall, 7 foot tall. And it was walking straight towards that window. It was about 20 yards out from, right in the broad daylight. I mean, the light, not the daylight, the floodlight. And it sent shivers through me so bad. I pulled the window down, and I grabbed him. I said, we're going to leave. We're not staying here. And so we got in the truck and went about 5 miles down the road to a big hayfield, parked there, and spent the rest of the night. And I got up the next day, and I didn't have any more symptoms of this Crohn's disease, which was terrible. I'd had a near death from it. And I'd never taken another bit of medicine for it since. And I was on it for 17 and a half years.
You get home and, you got to tell your wife what's happened. You got to tell the rest of your family. She doesn't want to hear it. And you guys are worried, and rightfully so, about the story getting out. These other guys, it's a small town kind of community. The word spreads. It becomes very hard for your family and your kids, especially going to school, when the word gets out, right?
Oh, it was terrible, George. I married a Pentecostal holiness girl. I was born a Baptist, and we've been married 40 years in June. But she being a mother, like she's always been the best mom, and with 4 little kids there, and my daughter 10 years old, and I'm talking about aliens or whatever it was, these UFOs, and it was scaring the children, so she didn't want me talking about it. But, so I kind of went in this depression, felt like I couldn't tell what, it was all bottled up in me. So for about 10 months, I didn't say anything. But the whole community already knew, and the church was already there sprinkling holy water on my property and on me, and thinking I was playing with the devil himself. And so finally I had to tell it, and saw Stanton Friedman on one of the UFO shows, UFO Files. He mentioned the word MUFON, so I looked them up and I filed a report, and they called me right away, and it scared me. I'm like, I just wanted to write it out and send it to you. I wasn't looking for anybody to come talk. But they insisted, and I put them off from October until February of the following year before I'd let them come. And when they did, in 2 months' time, they'd done a Discovery Channel show. It was all that quick.
That story you tell in the book about that encounter with MUFON, if it had just been a MUFON investigation, that could have been fine. But they wanted to do this TV show, and so the investigation was really for the TV show, and they pressured you into agreeing to go on the show with them. And then when you show up to do what you thought was going to be an interview, they had you walk into a room and do a lie detector test, right?
They did. And it was horrible. The whole thing was horrible because it convinced me, because the community was so hard on us and my children, they were actually trying to get the children away from me because this is just the way the church was thinking. You don't need to be around him. He's doing something. It's got to be the devil. But they convinced me that we would be vindicated. We'll vindicate you. We got the evidence. We got all this. We had circles burned in the yard. They found evidence in the soil and on the trees. And there was 8 other witnesses around the community that came forward, but no, they didn't do any of that. They did what Jim told me was a hack job. He felt bad about it when he saw it. And that's when hell, you might say, pardon my language, set in, because now it's my children are going to school and their classmates are making fun of them and their father. The teachers were calling them up to tell the story, and then the whole school would laugh at them, and it really messed my children up, and I felt responsible for it the whole time. But the weird thing is NASA came right away in 2008, and they were the only folks that made sense. And there was we've been studied for 15 years by the government, according to Jim, more than anybody in the world, and by many different agencies, CIA, DIA, DOD, even, British intelligence and Australian, FBI, plenty different agencies, different people. But yeah, it was a rough time.
The things get a little bit better for you because of an experience your wife has. We're going to go to a break in about 2 minutes, but your wife doesn't want to hear it until the day she has something. I think it was in broad daylight, right?
Yeah, we were celebrating the school starting back, so they wanted to go water skiing or doing something. And we were in my little study, all of my children, and I'm sitting on the couch with my back to the three windows along that wall, and she's facing us in a recliner. And one of my other boys was sitting close to her. They were facing three of us. And suddenly it was in June or July, or maybe August. It was late in the year, and her eyes got big as saucers. She turned white, and she jumped up and couldn't speak. All she was doing was pointing. What had happened is I'd been praying that she would see this so she would understand. And immediately, that didn't go over too good when, after I told her, I've been praying for you this would happen. She got mad and said, don't ever pray for me again. But what had happened was this being kind of glided up behind me and looked through the window. It was 7 foot tall at least. Looked through the window at her. Eye to eye. We couldn't see it because it was behind us. But my other son and she saw it plain as day. And it paused for a second and just kind of glided off. It wasn't walking. It wasn't moving up and down. It was just like floating in the air. And
I think she also she was driving and saw something like a big ice cream cone right in the middle of the road. Chris, as these experiences continue, as you encounter more beings and orbs and things of that sort, and other members of your family see it, what are you thinking they are? Are you thinking they're aliens? Or are you thinking, you don't think that they're demons, as some church leaders suggested, but what do you think these things are?
Well, George, I really don't know. I can tell you what and I've done this hundreds of times with witnesses, government witnesses. I mean, even the History Channel recently. I couldn't really tell you for sure. I don't think nobody knows. The government doesn't really know, but I do know it's conscience-based. I don't believe it's what I'm experiencing is malevolent at all. I would say it was benevolent. I know that it comes from my 16 years of talking with hundreds and hundreds of people. It's always the same. People who are suffering a loss from a loved one or whatever, that's when these things usually start happening. And so without calling, they're spiritual beings. It was a spiritual experience. I was praying for help, and these UFOs came. I wasn't expecting that, Nobody would be. But the thing is, they still come, and they come in big numbers. And everybody that comes here, not everybody, because some people just don't get it. I think they're too skeptic. But we film 25 or 30 orbs in a night without any problem.
Yeah, you sent me some videos for my perusal, and boy, they're really something. I'm telling you, that's pretty persuasive. Tell us about the lady. So, you were still going through a pretty rough time trying to figure this stuff out, why the experiences are happening, people who don't believe you in the community and even in the UFO world. And then things change when you encounter her. So tell us about that first time.
Yeah, this is when magic happened. So we'll fast forward from 2007, and for 5 years, I call it 5 years of darkness, till Easter of 2012. Those 5 years were horrible. My family were being picked on at school, and of course my mom and dad, NASA walked over, a friend of mine from NASA, and flashed his badges on him and said, "You got to believe your son, he's telling you the truth." And see, these people changed the family dynamics. They didn't have to do that, and did it without me knowing it. And but for 5 years it was very dark. I could never get a photo. I could never get a video. I walk out and there's something right over my house, a couple 100 feet. I go to take a picture and it destroyed my camera. I'd call somebody, come look, and it would always appear where nobody else would see it but me or my wife and kids. So we became basically isolated as a family from all the happenings and the ridicule. And on Saturday night before Easter in 2012, I walked outside and I just shouted at the sky. I said, I'm done. I'm never doing this again. I'm never talking about it again. Why would you come and help me only to make life worse for me? So I actually said that out loud. And then that night I went to bed. My wife was up in the front part of the house because all the kids had friends over, and our only little girl, she'd sleep with her, just being that good mom. And so I was laying there asleep right by myself. About 3 o'clock in the morning, it was dead on 3. I saw it on the clock because this audible voice, very loud voice, said, "Arise," just like that. And I sat up in my bed, terrified. I said, somebody's in here. I heard that. It was an audible, loud sound, manly voice. And suddenly I just saw this kind of fuzzy movement at the foot of my bed, and I felt like I was half under a trance or something. I got up, got fully dressed, walked out the back door, and made my way to the kennel, following behind these shadowy figures. And suddenly we get near the kennel, and this all seems like a dream, right? It's what it seems like. But it wasn't. And this shadowy figure hands me this thing, puts it in my hand, and it looks like a tube of sausage like you would buy from the grocery store, maybe 3 pounds or so. But it felt furry. It felt like it was a living creature, but it was pricking my hand, so I dropped it. And this voice said, you picked that up, you must keep that. And so when I reached down to pick it up, I looked up and there's nobody there. They're gone. Now I'm standing out by the dog kennel with this thing I'm juggling in my hands. I don't know what it is. I didn't want to hold it. I didn't know, if it was dangerous or what it was. So I opened the kennel and I go to sit it in the kennel. And the minute I closed the door, I stood up. This blast of wind hit me, knocked me over backwards. And as I've fallen over backwards, a cow comes right over top of me. I could see up through it. It was the weirdest thing. I landed on my back, rolled over to my stomach, and all in one motion to get up and run. Because, I was raised next door to cows and hogs, and we had them. And I just knew it was coming back. But instead, there's this beautiful lady, glowing. She wasn't very tall, 4 feet maybe. She was hovering. Her feet were 3 feet off the ground, about 6 or 7 feet from me. She looks right at me and she says, "This is your burden." She said, "You know why I'm here. This is your burden you must bear." In other words, she was telling me, you're not going to quit. And she said, and if you do this, I'll help you. I'll be with you, and I'll let you film us with camera and share us with witness. But you must do this. You got to tell what you know. And that's what she told me. And so all of a sudden, George, magic starts happening. Pure magic. There's no other way to say it. When you read the book, it goes clear to the White House. Suddenly, I have a dog that is injured. That there were 6 or 7 witnesses there, and her neck was cut wide open. On the side of her neck, she was bleeding to death. And Grant Cameron was there. You probably know Grant. He had his camera out taking photos, and all my kids and their friends. It was a bright, sunny day. And I reached down and picked her up. She ran in the back door, bleeding all over the house. I picked her up and ran her outside, laid her on the patio, and put my hand on her neck. And I just knew she was dying. I looked up at everybody and said, "What do we do? You can't call an ambulance. She's going to die right here. I don't know what to do." And I just looked up at heaven and said, how do I help this dog? And immediately she just kind of went limp. And I felt this difference in feeling. And I lifted my hand and there was no more hole in her neck at all. And everybody saw it. And then 2 years later, I'm in Washington, D.C. They flew me up there to help this young child that he had to make a wish that, he was going to die. He had a feeding tube. His mama was a doctor. His grandpa was a cardiologist. And they had him in every clinic known to man that could help this child, and there was just no more help. And he's a junior in college now. And I'm not saying I did anything, but something happened. And I think it was them, somehow. And if it wasn't, if he just got cured automatically, the fact that the government would reach out to somebody that's a UFO person for a last resort to help one of these high-level families, one of their children, was pretty an amazing thing to me. Yeah, it just keeps going. There's so many accounts of stuff like that, and it's hard to talk about one set. Yeah. Okay. So we take and from that point, that was 2015. John Alexander comes. I meet John early on in 2015 when we were working on the first chapter of the books about the Pope and the danger he faced in Philadelphia. And I met John working on that, doing some remote viewing. And then he comes to my house in October of that year, wants to see where everything happened. So I take him down on the river, his wife, Victoria, and my daughter, Emily. And we park up at the gate and walk down to the river and showed him everything that happened there. And we come back up out of the river just about dark. And John's like, can we sit here a little while until the stars come out? And I said, sure. And so about 15 minutes of standing there, I looked at John and I sensed the presence. I said, John, they're here right now. And within 10 seconds, this bright ball of light, an orb appeared. It didn't fly over, it appeared right above us, thin air, and went zipping off to the south. Well, John wrote his book, Reality Denied. So the whole second chapter is about that experience he had with us on that river. And he talks about the temporal relationship, how it was that I knew that it was there before it appeared. And that's one of the big things the government and these scientists, these academics are trying to figure out how do you do that. And I heard John tell somebody on the History Channel recently, they asked him, they said, John, how did he do that? How did he know in 3 hours in advance it's going to appear at 6 o'clock with the sun still up beside Jupiter, which it did? And he laughed. He said, I have no idea how he does that. That's kind of the things we're into right now. Okay, so to fast forward past that, we get into it was around about 2018, I began to get very sick with rheumatoid arthritis. I've been sick with it since 2009, but it got really, really bad from 2013 to 2019. And Jim comes to my house it was in October 2016, Semi-Van. This is one of the coolest things that he did that he didn't have to do. But this is why I've always been kind of pro-government, because he was here for my birthday, he and his wife, Deb, and my middle son, Jeremy, was 15 when it all happened, and it really messed him up. He was trying to date, and he was getting ridiculed and picked on, and it put him in a shell. He went off to college and didn't want to come home. He's trying to avoid the whole situation. And that was the first time Jim met Jeremy. He he looks at Jeremy while we were eating, and he says, "Why are you avoiding your father? Are you ashamed of him?" And he says, "I'm not avoiding him. It's just I don't want to talk about the subject. I don't want to be around it. You know, I've had to deal with it with friends for all these years." So Jim was like, "Okay, you kids," he said, "tonight we're going to have a fire on your dad's back patio." He said, "Invite all your friends over. Everybody that ever picked on you or denied you or doubted you. And I want to have a chat with them." So it was funny that night. It was incredible to watch all these kids come driving up, because they went out and told everyone, and here they come, 3 young boys driving police cars, had just graduated school and graduated the academy, and they were new cops. They come up still in uniform, and I just walked away. I walked out and let Jim have the show, and he gave them all a piece of, told them exactly that it was real, and he said, "You have no idea who is watching your dad or this man. It goes clear to the top." And so there was another thing, you know, that they did that helped us tremendously. And that's kind of why I've been quiet so long. That's why I haven't talked about it publicly, because I've been involved with these kinds of people that have really had a concern for the family, for the children, and also wanting to study this. But it's been my...
Chris, let me ask you, John Alexander, who wrote an introduction to your book, he's the one that told me I really needed to pay attention to your case and that it was legit. It's because he and his wife, Victoria, came to visit you, and they had an experience there, right?
They sure did. That was in 2015 in October. They came and stayed 2 or 3 days. And on a Saturday evening, we went down to the river, and he got to see it with me. And he wrote his book, Reality Denied, about that. And the cool thing was, I told him in advance it was above us. I knew it was there. I could hear it. They call it telepathy, but, you know, it's just this feeling. I guess it wells up inside, but it appeared within 10 seconds of me telling him. And that really got a lot of attention to a lot of people after that.
You know, one of the most moving parts of your book for me is the personal changes you underwent as a result of these encounters. I mean, it was fairly profound. I know you had been a hunter your whole life, and you had helped raise hogs and managed hog farms. Your attitude about animals changed quite a bit, didn't it?
Completely about face. I mean, I was a hunter. Grew up with a gun in my hand. I was shot at 10 years old, point blank in the back. Nearly killed me. And that was that was really hard to get over. But today, after all that happened, today I won't even smush a bug. I pick them up and take them outside. I can't, if it runs from me, it's scared of me and it don't want to die. And I just can't do it anymore. It's horrible to see anything's life taken. And I didn't used to be that way at all.
The experiences continue for you and your family. What was the most recent thing that's happened? Has there something happened in the last couple of days?
Last night, I went out and took 7, 8 videos last night. And tonight. I meant to say tonight, too. I haven't even uploaded them yet, but I have probably 2,000 videos on my telephone that I have taken in the last 2 years alone. And the crazy thing is, George,
Chris, I'd like to hear about how this has changed your spiritual beliefs. You're a spiritual guy. You know, your wife's father, their family was deeply involved in the church. In the beginning, they felt that this is maybe satanic or devils or something like that. Did the church leaders in your community come to accept this as more people had the experiences? And how did it change your religious beliefs, if at all?
Well, for the most part, a lot of the churches have. People have come to me over the years and are accepting it more now as being something positive. Of course, there are still churches that tell me you're not allowed in these doors if you ever talk about it again. And I'm like, okay, see ya. But I don't attend a church like I used to. I haven't in 15 years or 16. But I'm more spiritual now than I have ever been. And simply one thing, George, that I think is going to come out this year. There's a new History Channel series coming out this summer. And I think you know about that. And I can't say much about it other than they were here for 7 days. And we really got a lot of stuff to share with on the History Channel without giving it away. But
does this communications that you have with these entities, have they told you about things that are going to happen?
Yeah, it's the craziest thing. I mean, I knew it in 2019. 2019, it was Easter Monday. I walked out my back door. We live on a little cabin on a pond, and I walked out the back door, and the pond's only 5-6 feet from the back door, from the patio. So I walked out there, and immediately, about 300 or 400 feet up, this orb appears, and it appears flashing at me. It was energetic. It was excited to see me. That's the way it acted, and it spiraled itself down to the ground on the far side of the pond, and was sitting there on the bank, bouncing up and down about 10 feet, flashing red, yellow, white through that spectrum, orange. We go from bright white to yellow and so on. And it really got my attention. And suddenly it starts towards me. It was so amazing to see it come to the ground and stop, and then start coming at me. This intelligent being in that orb. I could see it. The Lord was inside of it, illuminating this translucent figure. And it gets 25 feet from me, and I'm just hovering over the pond, right over this group of lily pads. And I took my phone out, and I'm fumbling with it, and I'm nervous, and I'm shaking, and my dog's beside me. I put it on video. I found video, and I'm trying to keep my eyes on it that close. And I thought I was recording it for a good 5 to 7 minutes. I looked up, and I had never discovered I'd never hit record. And the minute I hit record, that orb just went out. The whole show it was putting on disappeared. I'm like, dang it, I really wanted that video. But suddenly it flashed me, and it flashed me for another 18 minutes, and I filmed it. I have it on film for 18 minutes right at it, flashing me from 25 feet, which I have a lot of. I think we're on tonight, this one flashing me in the forest from 20 feet away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the time. I film them on the ground a lot. Well, it told me, it said, this is 2019, it said, we're going to help you, witness and camera, to share our existence with the world. That's what we're going to have you do. But it said, there's trouble coming. Tell the people to stir up and lock the doors for a while because there's going to be trouble. Well, immediately, I hadn't talked in years. I picked the phone up and called some podcast folks, and before you know it, I did 10 interviews that year. And I told that there was going to be trouble and that it was going to let me film it even at a greater pace, because in 2012, when the lady came, before that, I couldn't take a picture. After that, I could take photos, videos, I could share it with anyone, pretty much anyone, especially, government scientists or academics or students. But 2019, COVID hit right away. 2020, COVID hit. And I guess that's what it was warning me about, the trouble. But what happened was the ability to see it and to walk outside and it comes. I don't have to go outside and look for it. It comes from me most of the time. And that increased it 100-fold, and it's been going exponentially since. And I mean, it's really amazing that they do talk. They talk in a telepathic manner, and I think they're wanting to be known, and we're gonna share it with the world. Well, when it first happened, they reported it and did a fairly good job of reporting it, and I mean didn't really get out of hand much at all. They did say a few things that was kind of funny, and I didn't take it funny. But here recently, in 2020, when the U.S. government came out and announced it during COVID, most people don't know it, but the government really came forward in 2020. I was a part of that. But the newspaper here wrote a big article vindicating me, and that was the greatest thing. So that's really the only two articles I've noticed from the local area.
I thought the story you tell in the book, Chris, about Jim Semivan coming out there and gathering together all these kids who've been giving your kids a bad time. You had an event where he gathered them in. He says, call them all. Call the most horrible skeptics who've given the kids the worst time of all. I want to talk to them. And then he delivered a blistering sermon of sorts to say why you were important, why this was a credible case, and why they needed to knock it off. And it worked, right?
Oh, it sure did. And, I'd never told the parts, even like being in Washington, D.C. From the lady in 2012, in 2.5 years, I was sitting in Washington, D.C. with some of the highest level people on the planet. And they got to see some things during that one visit. I write about it in the book without giving it away. That really, incredible things have happened. And it all came after 2012. And it just keeps on going about how many people have seen this or seen things that happen like, I don't like to claim healing anyone, but I've seen a lot of that with people.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic that you cover in the book. We won't have time to do it, but it's worth a read just by itself.
Well, I think their natural form is light, a ball of light, and I have video. I have a video of an orb approached me, and this young lady who was sick with lung cancer. And she called me wanting to come to the house and stand around this tree. We had this tree that caught fire, like a burning bush type of tree. And it was pretty famous for a long time. Well, she wanted to come and bring her girlfriends and have me ask for her a healing. Well, she was standing there right to my left, and the young lady was on my right with her cell phone, and suddenly an orb appears about 6 or 8 feet in front of me, and it's coming straight at me. It's rotating, corkscrewing, and suddenly it flashes, and out of that orb steps about a 7-foot-tall white glowing figure. It's only 4 feet from me, and it moves to my left, and next Monday she goes to have her cancer scan, and it was all gone but one little speck in her lung. So what do you make of that? I don't know. I just know I've seen a lot of that kind of thing.
Give me your sense of, obviously you say nobody really knows who they are or what they are. Do you think they live here or they live everywhere? And what sense do you have of their interest in us is what? To help us, to get us to change our ways, to save the planet? What's the bottom line?
Bottom line is, I think they live here. They probably made us or had a part in it, and I think they watch over us. But I also believe where there's good, there's bad. So you have to be very careful with what you're looking for. And I was crying out in desperation, and they came. But you could get a dark figure if you're not ready for it. But I really think they probably created us, and they live above us, and they're orbs. just like the cover of my book. You see this, he's holding an orb in his hand with three little dots.
Yeah.
A Leonardo da Vinci painting, and he knew something way back then that it's just coming to focus now.
Kind of curious about your experiences with UFO groups after that MUFON experience. The MUFON and Discovery Channel, they really did a number on you in putting that piece on the air. You did start speaking to UFO groups after that. I don't know if you've been patched things up with MUFON or not, but I'm curious what the relations are now for you and these other UFO organizations.
Well, yeah, I like MUFON. In fact, there's most of the people there are all good people. But the characters that were there during, back then it was totally classified. It was the highest classified thing in the government, the UFO was. And in 2008, 2007, it wasn't going to be, they made me look bad, and the guys that were running it were from the government. I know they were. I have proof of it, and they didn't last very long. They came and went right after, they appeared on the scene when I reported it, and within a year they were gone. And as far as the rest of MUFON, I would be glad to be involved with it.
So the lady, after you encounter her, you're able to document these experiences, take photos and videos, and they clearly want you to tell your story. And that's, that culminates with this book, UFO of God. You think you're directed to tell this tale, right?
100%. And anybody that comes here will understand that right away. I've had academics come here that they don't even know how to react. It just changed their lives in such a way that now they're out talking publicly and don't care about their tenure or anything. So,
what's it been like for you in dealing with skeptics? You mentioned in passing earlier that some of them have come there and they just don't believe, so they don't see something. If they don't open themselves up to it, they're just not going to get it. But have they raked you over the coals?
Well, not really, because I don't give them the time of day. NASA told me early on, I say NASA without using names, it was people there. I asked, why is it some people with me can see the phenomenon and some can't? And their explanation was there's a truth switch inside of a person. Once you flip that switch, it opens them up. But then you have people that are skeptics, and it don't matter how much you tell them, their brain is not capable of ever understanding. It's not the person, it's just the way they're wired. And so I don't care about the skeptics anymore. Let them, they're all going bye-bye anyhow. For the most part, there are hardly any left like there used to be.
Well, there's still some diehards out there, and I think your attitude is pretty healthy, though. Just don't give them the time of day and don't let them in at all. Chris Bledsoe, I really enjoyed the book, UFO of God, The Extraordinary True Story of Chris Bledsoe. There's so much more that we did not get to cover. I encourage people to check this out, and I really enjoy talking to you, and I appreciate you staying up late to join us.
Absolutely, and I appreciate it too, George. And they can find this, UFOofgod.com is my website. It has a link to Amazon there where you can buy the book, but we have testimonials, and my social media links and all are on that website if you check it out.
I recommend it, and I'll come see you sometime if I'm welcome there.
You're always welcome, my friend. Always.
Thank you.
I would love that.
I'll do that. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.